my name is Alex. I'm Customer Success Manager at WorkPass, and I will do today's webinar. The reason why I do it, because I strongly believe that outcome orientation requires autonomous teams. And yeah, I believe it's worth to talk about that. And today's webinar, I will provide you some input, some thoughts from my side, and then I'm also interested in your thoughts on it. And let's try to have an open exchange, especially at the end when we do a Q&A session. In addition, I'm also interested from where you listen us today. We are located in Munich, so I joined from Munich, and feel free to post in the chat where you joining us today. That's very interesting. In addition, we will also want to do a quick poll with you to understand how experienced you are with outcome management or OKRs already. So 2 questions here. And my colleague will start a quick poll with you. First question is, do you already working with OKRs? And if yes, how would you rate your OKR knowledge? Okay, I see now 60% already working with OKRs. This is pretty cool. 20 to 25%. So like, okay, kind of. Yeah, there are also some mixed forms of objectives and maybe metrics. And just 20% say like, no, we don't work with OKRs yet. For the second one, OKR knowledge. We'll also wait a few seconds until we have the first responses here. Okay, I can see there are around 50% again with 6 or more out of 10 or rate their OKR knowledge with 6 out of 10 or more. We have a few people with no or very few knowledge so far. This is completely fine because therefore we have the webinar today and also talk about that one. Especially at the beginning, I will dive into that topic. What does outcome orientation actually means? How does outcome orientation is connected to OKRs? This is the first topic of today's presentation. Okay, then thanks a lot for your responses. And then let's start into the webinar. First of all, once again, yeah, my name is Alex. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or via mail if you have any further questions that can't be answered during the meeting. I'm very interested in following up on the discussions we have today. And then let's have a look or a quick look on the agenda. I structured the session into 6 parts. We will start with a brief definition of outcome management. In that part, I will also explain the issue of limited autonomy. So what happens if teams really have only limited autonomy, especially when organizations try to work with OKRs? This also helps them to understand how I perceive autonomous teams. Then I will tell you what are best practices and pitfalls in the OKR process to provide teams the required autonomy. Then we'll do a deep dive on capacity management, as from my perspective, this is one incremental part of autonomous teams. But if we don't have time for that, or you're not that interested in it, we can also skip that part and have some more time for the discussions. Let's see how far we get. And then the Q&A session means you answer questions and I try to answer them probably. And if you have questions during the webinar, you can enter them with the Q&A feature, and I will then answer them at the end together. And last but not least, this is the sixth point of today's presentation. If you have not completely roasted myself during the Q&A part, I will provide you my top 3 of waste in organizations around OKRs. This is not 100% related to the topic only, but the main part of outcome management or outcome orientation is avoiding waste. And so this is definitely worth to have a look at. Okay, then let's start. I will start with a short video today, describing in a kind of funny way what happens if organizations don't work outcome oriented. Let's start the video quickly. Okay. You may now say, come on, you cannot compare a security man in front of a stadium with a job of a white collar worker. But from my perspective, I can, because for this man, the outcome doesn't really matter. But imagine what would happen if you provide people a purpose and it becomes important for them, or for this man especially, how many dangerous items have been brought into the stadium. Or it becomes important how many people have been injured by objects brought into the stadium during the game. Or maybe a bit more holistic, how many people have been safely visited the game. My feeling is they would work in a different way. And as outcome orientation in general is rather a mindset and a methodology, I believe this fits quite well. And for me, it's absolutely important to provide people purpose and empower people, also taking their own decisions. But let's have a deeper look into an outcome in general. So what is an outcome? An outcome from our perspective, and if I talk about our perspective, I mean the WordPress perspective, is defined as a measurable value provided to the customer. And here it doesn't matter at the end if it is an internal or external customer. So sometimes you do some work for another internal department or an internal team or internal unit, and this is also then your customer. And the value that is described is mostly derived from a certain need of this customer. Also important for an outcome always pay into an overarching KPI, and by that drive the strategy. And you can see that as a value driver tree. You have the lagging KPIs at the end, maybe financial ones, revenue, gross profit, margins, these kind of things. And then you have outcomes before in that value driver tree, leading indicators that should provide you an indication how these lagging indicators at the end develop over time. I will provide you an example after that slide, how this can look like. And then a term that is also often used in the outcome methodology or in our speech is the word outcome waste, what describes at the end all work that is done, what is not contributing to an outcome. Means if you conduct a lot of projects, if you do a lot of tasks or execute on an action plan in your daily work, and this is not contributing to an outcome, but you just create outputs, then we talk about outcome waste. But now, as I said, let's look in a tangible or more tangible example. And this example is about the most pressuring issue in nowadays world, climate change. We start on the right on our long-term strategy, described with the big KPI on top, because KPIs are the way to measure the progress on a strategy. Our long-term strategy is to limit global warming. And we defined the associated KPIs, limit global warming, and make sure that it stays below 1.5 degrees. Now we have the problem that we only know in about 20 or 50 years if we will reach that long-term goal, because then we can assess, okay, our global warming was above or below the 1.5 degrees. So it's really hard to see how it will develop nowadays. So we need an intermediate with a leading indicator, and this is our outcome described via the OKR. And in this example, we can say like we reduce CO2 emission or we have a negative CO2 emission. Yeah, because if the overall CO2 balance is negative, we will definitely make sure that we can limit global warming below the expected or aspired 1.5 degree. You will now realize that we are also failing on the middle one. So we also not able to reduce CO2 emission or have a negative CO2 emission. But to be honest, yeah, this is not the topic of today's webinar. This is definitely a big issue we have, but yeah, not for today. And then let's go back at the beginning of that chain or at the end of the chain, depending from which direction you look at it. There's the actual output described in an initiative or project. For example, you launch a new electric vehicle or you install solar panels on top of your roofs in order to reduce CO2 emissions. So you can do several things on output level. So you can work on several things in order to drive the middle layer, the OKRs. So you wanna reduce CO2 emission. And actually, this picture describes perfectly why you need OKRs and why you have to work and think in outcomes, because you have to close the gap between the long-term strategy, the lagging indicators, and your actual work on an operational level. All right. If there are any further questions, I will have a look on it at the end, as I said. I guess also a topic we can further discuss. But now let's focus on what happens if decisions are made away from the customer or actual issue. And for that, I have described an issue or customer need that we want to solve. And our customer need in this situation is that hotel guests complaining about long waiting hours in front of the elevator. So, do you have any ideas about the hypothesis how to solve the customer need and the issue? So, how would you tackle that problem? Hotel guests complaining about long waiting hours in front of the elevator. Maybe you can think about that on your own. What could be a potential solution? Because at the end, when you do some work, especially with respect to outcomes, you always start with a customer issue or customer need. Then you have a hypothesis how to solve what addresses the customer need, and then you come up with a solution, what you actually do with your output. And this should then drive your outcome, and by that, the KPI. Let's suppose the hypothesis to solve the issue or customer need is when we increase the speed of our elevators, our guests stop complaining about long waiting hours. That is a logical sequence from my perspective. Yeah, they complaining, have to wait too long, then we increase speed, it's faster, so long waiting hours disappear. The solution connected to that hypothesis is then the modernization of real estate, including the renewal of our elevators. But what do you think? Is that a good solution or not? Because From my perspective, it's a very bad solution. Modernization of real estate means at the end high costs for the hotel, maybe further customers complaining about the noise in the building when they do the construction work. Yeah, maybe they have to use the stairs for some time because the elevators are not working anymore. So this is really not a good solution. But I mean, there's a customer need. We had a hypothesis how to solve it, and then we come up with a solution. So probably, actually, it should work. But as I said, the decision is taken far away from the customer. Maybe we have to think about what happens if we take the decision closer to the customer. The issue or underlying customer need is the same. Hotel guests complaining about long waiting hours in front of the elevator. The hypothesis is a different one. Our hypothesis is now our guests complaining about long waiting hours as they are bored waiting in front of the elevator without Wi-Fi. Now we have it. Because have you ever seen a person waiting for the train or something else that is annoyed? I just see people staring on their smartphones, and no one is bored at all. So important is that we really understand what is the actual need. And only then we can formulate a great hypothesis, and then we can come up with a proper solution. And in this example, the solution is pretty easy. Wi-Fi that also works within the elevators, because then people are not bored in front of the elevators and also not during the drive or during or while waiting within the elevator to reach the respective level. And I mean, the solution is much, much cheaper. You don't have that construction work. You don't annoy people with noise. So it's a very, very simple solution just because we have found out what is the actual customer need. And I don't want to blame management in that situation. It's not, I mean, they did their job. They identified the issue. They had a hypothesis to come up with a solution. And I mean, also some operational teams might come up with that solution, and also vice versa. Some management teams will come up with the second solution because they investigate a bit better. Okay, what is the actual underlying customer need? But what I try to bring across is what message should come across. We reduce the probability of taking wrong decisions when we are closer to the customer, and yeah, letting business decide what is the right approach. But this is just one situation. I mean, there are further situations where the business that is closer to the customer or the teams that are closer to the customer have an information advantage. And it's all about using that information advantage during the OKR cycle as well. Here you can see all situations along the OKR cycle where teams have that information advantage. First, teams know for what reasons they spend their time. So during capacity planning, maybe to look at that one a bit closer, why I have entered capacity planning to that OKR cycle, because from my perspective, it should be an incremental part of that. Only if people know, okay, how much time is left for strategic work, they can draft proper OKRs and also ambitious goals, but not too ambitious goals. So therefore, this is, from my perspective, a very important thing. And I added here. And here, the first time, they have an information advantage because they know how much time they spend for operative work, and then also how much time is left for strategic work. Second one, OKR drafting. Teams know their customers and their needs much better. That was the example with the elevator disaster I described before. This is also closely related for what reasons teams spend their time. So alignment, teams are aware how much time they have left for contributions. Alignment, yeah, you can do a lot of alignment if teams don't have the capacities to support other teams on their work. This is in vain. So it doesn't matter. You can also get rid of it because yeah, it delivers no value at all then. So once again, information advantage for check-ins. Teams realize early on if they are on the wrong way and then can easily iterate on it. But if you have to report it up front and need an approval from the management, time flies. And if you want to succeed in a fast changing environment, you have to be fast. So let teams decide on their own how they can fix a certain topic, maybe how they can start another initiative, or what kind of initiative or what kind of projects, and that they can get rid of old things that have no impact or do not drive the respective key results. So let these teams decide here as well. And then last but not least, also teams know best what went well and what went wrong and can improve going forward. So also here, information advantage once again. We want to play now a brief game on what happens if management takes these decisions instead of the teams. And for sure, as once again, this should not blame management. It's just about showing you the implications for the OKR process if teams have not the required autonomy. Okay, first situation. And these examples are not, or most of these examples are really actual situations we have experienced with our customers. So these are not just ideated by our own. First one. The management tells teams you have to spend 15% of your capacities for OKRs. Now, one conflict arises, and this is the teams who should spend 15% of their capacities for OKRs spend already 95% of the time for operative work. What now happens is this is actually not working because they have to spend 110% of their capacities to manage their workload. What happens then what is the implication for OKR drafting? In order to manage their workload, teams start to set non-ambitious goals because they realize, okay, I have 5% capacities left. The only way how I can achieve my goal is being less ambitious. But this is not in the interest of the OKR methodology. Alignment. What happens with alignment? Teams avoid contributions to other team goals to manage their workload. So they will never support other teams because they just focus on their own. Because they have 5% capacities left, this is not working at all. At the end, what happens then if teams cannot support each other? They are blocked over the cycle and cannot reach their goals. So also the cross-functional collaboration that should be enhanced by OKRs is not working anymore. And then at the end, if they look at the OKR cycle in their review, no team member will say like, oh yeah, OKRs are a great methodology, we want to work with that, because they are just frustrated of higher workloads with OKRs. But OKRs is not a methodology to increase workload of all employees. It's more about working more resource efficient, working on the most important things, setting priorities, but not working more. So it's actually a very bad idea to let management decide about capacities in the OKR cycle. Second situation. This is the example from elevators. What happens if management decides about team priorities? First thing, and this was realized in the first example already, the priority decided by the management is not addressing the actual customer need. So it's very important that teams with that information advantage decide on their own. What is the second issue implicated by that management decision? Teams cannot really iterate on their initiatives or projects during the cycle, and this is now connected to check-ins, where they actually should reflect where we are, and if it's not moving to the right direction, iterate on their work, maybe get rid of something, maybe start something new. But this is not actually possible if the management decides rather an output, modernization of real estate, instead of an outcome, satisfy customers again, for example. And once again, last but not least, it leads to frustration if teams are not able to achieve their goals over the cycle. And then also here again, connected to the review, if you ask them, if you like the methodology, you like working with OKRs, they will definitely not respond positively here. So I can really do this game again and again, and it leads to the same result. Teams have to decide on their own if you want to become an outcome-oriented organization, otherwise it will not work. Let's now also look at, okay, how can we avoid that? What are pitfalls or typical pitfalls, and also for sure best practices in order to avoid that and make autonomous teams in outcome-oriented organizations work. First, let's talk about the pitfalls. First pitfall from my perspective is a very common one, thinking implementing OKRs leads to autonomous teams. From my perspective, this is wrong. OKRs only work if teams can work autonomously, from my perspective. Management have to ensure that teams have the required amount of freedom in decision making. And this is crucial, especially if teams today, or a lot of teams are not used to take decisions on their own. This will not start with implementing OKRs. So like you have really provide them the freedom to do so. Second, autonomy for teams leads to less ambitious goals. Also here, I would say this is wrong. If teams can really decide on their own what will help them to better do their jobs, this leads to a higher engagement, and with a higher engagement in the execution, then they can also achieve much more, because it matters what they do. They have decided on their own what they want to do and what is important for them. And if that also affects their own job, this increases engagement, and by that increases also the ambitious, the level they choose for their goals. Third one, if teams decide on their priorities, these are not in line with the org strategy. This is also absolutely wrong, because for two reasons from my perspective. On the one hand side, with OKRs, you focus always on the value for the customer. As also the customer is part of almost every strategy in nowadays organization, there is at least a big overlap. In addition, you do the vertical alignment and you make sure that teams draft OKRs based on a strategic direction. And also we have some customers who have a approach where they collect priorities from operational teams first, share it with the management, and management draft OKRs based on these input. And they realized as well that the overlap between what would operational teams do and what would the management do is very, very huge. So here I also can just disagree. And last but not least, autonomy of teams leads to loss of control for the management. And this is wrong for the reason of why we are using key results. Key results should provide an indication about the future development of the KPIs. Means with leading indicators, the managers can predict the future and intervene if they believe it is required. These are from my perspective, the biggest pitfalls when we're talking about autonomous teams and outcome orientation. But let's also have a look on what should be ensured and what are, at the end, best practices to make autonomous teams work. First, making capacity planning a mandatory part of the OKR cycle. This is, from my perspective, very important also to get the commitment of the employees and teams, because OKRs should lead to more focus and not to more workload. And teams can only assess how much they can achieve if they do their capacity planning and know, okay, how much capacities are left for strategic priorities. Also described before already, alignment only works if there are capacities left to support other teams. Otherwise, they will, or they may commit, but they will never deliver that. Second one, establishing escalation paths. As I said already, some teams are not used to take their own decisions. And sometimes they want to have the judgment or the opinion or the approval from the management. For example, you work on your own priority and you have to contribute to another very important priority in your organization. And then you have to decide, yeah, which is more important. And sometimes it's required then to spare that, or at least consult that with the manager. And therefore you need any kind of processes or escalation paths where you can get this feedback and solve these issues or problems. Then third one, right design of the org level goals. As we have seen, if you design a goal very output oriented, for example, modernization of real estate, then it's very hard to iterate as a team on that topic. So the highest level goals should be very outcome oriented, that really you just describe where you want to go, but not how to get there. And they should also not be too commanding. Yeah. So like, just to give you an example, and I guess the elevator example fits perfectly. If you decide you have to do X, Y, Z, then you have to do X, Y, Z. You cannot say like, no, I want to do something else. If you just say like, okay, you have to reach a certain target, how you do it, it's up to you. Then it's pretty easy to say like, okay, we try that one. If it's not working, we try another thing, and so on and so forth. The same issues you actually have if your portfolio process is not integrated in your OKR process, because you then very often start projects or initiatives and allocate budgets for these projects and initiatives. And then you tell teams, okay, now you have to decide what priorities you set for the cycle, what OKRs you set for the cycle, but actually the outputs below are set in stone already. And this is also that not working. So very important to also integrate that properly and have outcome-oriented high-level goals. And last but not least, also, I guess quite obvious, establish a culture of learning and support. Only if it's accepted that employees can also fail and not move in to the right direction from the beginning on, they will take decisions on their own. If they're scared to take decisions on their own because they could fail and then get a bad feedback or get maybe some pressure from the management, they will not do it. And here it's very important how you also review and steer OKRs. Yeah, be very supportive there. Look at OKRs. If you realize a team is not progressing on a certain topic, not asking why this is not progressing, but rather asking, how can I support you in order to achieve your goal? What do you need from our side? Do you need a decision? Do you need something else, etc.? These kind of things. These are the most important things from my perspective. Now, let's have a brief look at capacity management, and then let's move over to the Q&A. And for capacity planning, this is very important. I have just described the process, and if you do it with WordPress or not, it doesn't matter at the end. It's just what I believe is important when doing capacity management with integrated in the OKR process. And on the bottom of this slide, you can then see, okay, how you do that within WordPress, as we have also a dedicated capacity planning feature here. So first of all, it's important to know how many team capacities you have. In general, we do it like that you see, okay, how many team members do I have in my team? How many people are on vacation? Or maybe you can also calculate a buffer of absences due to illness and these kind of things, so that you have a general estimation about available team capacity. Then you try to estimate how much capacities are left for strategic work in a second step. Means you estimate how much time your team spends for their operational work. For example, meeting time. Yeah, you have maybe some meeting cascades in your organization, and during this time, people are not able to work on other topics. Then you have maybe some things where you just keep the lights on. Yeah, for example, reportings you have to share, or maybe also some answering some questions, whatever. What is required to keep the lights on within your business could also be one part. And in general, we believe the benchmark companies spend at least 60% of their time for operational work. And then you can also calculate a buffer. If you realize in the past, very often we had ad hoc requests during the cycle, then we should definitely plan a buffer in for that one, for these ones, because they can fly in again, and then we don't have time for our strategic work. So here in WordPress, we just calculate, okay, what is the average time spent on operational work, and then a buffer. What our tool is doing then, calculates at the end how much time is left for strategic work, for your own goals and your collaborations, and then you allocate it in the next step. And this is the third step. Very important here is, do the calculation of free capacities for strategic work before you start the OKR drafting, because then you can already consider how much time you have left for these for your own goals, yeah, and how ambitious you can be. After that one, after the drafting, you then allocate the capacities to your own goals. And also, if you have received any collaborations, means other teams have approached you to support you on a certain goal, then you can also allocate them there. Then you do the alignment, means really clarifying contributions in detail. And maybe you also, based on that, will refine your OKRs a bit. Maybe there's an overlap, you can get rid of an OKR and support another OKR instead, or you combine an OKR. Or everything stays as it is, but you're aware now what are your contributions towards other teams are, and then you can also consider these ones in your capacity planning. Then you allocate also capacities for contributions. And what we do at WordPress is then that you can also allocate more capacities than you actually have, and use that as a flagging mechanism or escalation path that you can flag towards your management or your manager. Hey, look, I have more capacities used than I actually have. There's a report generated where you can see, like, okay, on what goals teams are working and why they are overbooked, and then you can solve that issue. And the manager can decide, okay, this one is more important because maybe there are more dependencies to other goals, and at the end it's a critical goal that is driving a lot of other things in the organization. Therefore, you should focus on this one and get rid of another one. What is then also very important during the cycle, that you look at your capacities again. Yeah, maybe in a midterm review, for example, where you just look at your goals. Okay, what progress have we made so far? And if you realize, okay, I have made just very limited goal progress, and I'm not able to reach all my goals with the remaining time of my cycle, then you might get rid of one. Yeah, because to ensure really focus on what matters most, this is crucial. And it's better to just achieve one goal that is most important than just have a little bit progress on everything. And then last but not least, at the end of the cycle, you look at your capacities again and say like, okay, this is what we have learned, and we should consider for the next cycle again in order to improve over time. Because especially at the beginning, you will not be super advanced on that topic because it's very new for most of the people. This just as a input for you how to do capacity planning or how to integrate capacity planning in the OKR cycle. And I would propose let's have now the open discussion and also dive into your questions. Okay, first of all, I have to check what questions we have. And then also I have a look at the chat. Maybe there are further questions in. First question I see here is, you're saying in this example that what you call OKR is the objective of reduced CO2 emission, and the key result is actually a KPI. Let's quickly move back to that slide. If I'm right, so at the end, I just want to describe with that slide the middle layer OKRs in general. An objective could then be, just as an example, we want to reduce our balance or we want to become more sustainable in order to drive or become more attractive to customers who focus on these topics by reducing our CO2 emission. This could be a goal or an objective in that context. And one of the key results is then a reduced CO2 emission. Yeah, this is very important. When we are defining OKRs, we are always try to considering everything in the objective, means who is our customer, for whom we are doing this. And I guess sustainability is definitely a topic we're doing for everyone, but probably most for our own customers. So maybe we want to become more sustainable to attract new customers. This could be something. Then it's clear why we are doing that and for whom. And then also how we get there maybe can be described with the future state then. And one part of that is then the reduced CO2 emission. And for sure, for the other ones, for the other promises in the objective, we need another key result. Let me check the chat briefly. There have been some comments on that one. Okay, I see a lot of more questions in the chat. I will dive into these in a bit. Let me first use or take the questions from the Q&A part. How many objectives should a team focus on from your point of view? This is a very easy one, but there is no black and white answer on that one. I mean, if a team is setting, for example, 10 objectives, 10 OKRs, what is, from my perspective, way too much, yeah, but they are able to achieve all of them. Can I then say they have set too many goals or too many OKRs? I guess not. And if a team just have 1 or 2 OKRs, but they cannot reach them in the remaining time of the cycle, maybe then they had too much OKRs or too ambitious OKRs. So it depends a bit how ambitious your target in your key results is, and yeah, on the situation. Nevertheless, we propose 3 OKRs as a good orientation for teams in the size of 5 to 8 people. There's another one. When you plan your own OKRs, how do you consider other teams' OKRs that depend on your team? Would you create a dedicated OKR for their work? Okay, so at the end, I mean, there are 2 parts of that question. To rephrase it a bit, at the end, how do I identify dependencies and how can I ensure that I know the dependencies and can support in the right moment? At the end, every team normally drafts their OKRs based on a certain input. The input can be a higher level OKR. The input can also be a strategic artifact, such a KPI, a vision, maybe a mole or a BHAG. So something more long-term that should provide direction. Or, as I said, a higher level OKR. It could be an org OKR or a unit OKR, department OKR, if I'm just a team. And based on that, I draft my OKR. And then I usually know directly, okay, with my own work, I support that OKR because I drafted it based on this one. If I have a priority that's based on my own requirements, needs within the team and not connected to everything else, this is also fine, but then I have not too many overlaps very often. And then if you think about your own OKR, you also think about who else in my organization is required to reach my goal. And if you then realize, okay, I need, as a sales team, I need marketing, I need maybe sales enablement, I need product maybe, then you can reach out to these other teams and ask for the support. And therefore, it's very important that you think already during drafting, who else is needed in my organization to achieve my goals. And in the situation where you have similar topics in a goal, then you can decide rather if you want to have a joint goal in a joint team, or if one team that have more stake in the goal is owning the goal and the other team is maybe just supporting by owning a key result or by owning an initiative or a project or a task that is driving the goal. So here you have to look a bit in what is the contribution of the individual stakeholders on a goal, and what I would definitely avoid is having goals on the same, having similar goals on the same topic in different teams. I would then combine them, because then you make sure to avoid double work and redundancies. And for the question, once again, would you create a dedicated OKR for their work? I would probably not. I would make them part of my own goal then. Another question is, if we are using sprint points, how that can be translated to hours when measuring your overall capacity. I mean, sprint points, I would say this is probably similar to story points in the agile methodology. Here, it depends a bit, yeah, on the organization, I would say, yeah. Some people have a clear view on what means one story or sprint point for their work, yeah. It's hard to provide a general answer on that. It depends on the organization. But what you can do is, if you're using sprint points, maybe you have a conversation on that in the next retro to discuss, okay, if we want to translate sprint points into hours, what would that mean? And then I'm pretty sure you will get at least similar understanding and can do the capacity planning. At the end, capacity management is a process. You have to get used to it. You have to get more advanced over time. And then you should probably just start, do a rough estimation. And then maybe you realize after the first cycle, okay, I'm far away from the actual capacity that is required, or I have planned way too much time in for a certain topic. But then you can get better and better over time. I mean, also working with the methodology is an iterative process. Okay, then I will also look at the questions in the chat. There is another one. How does the prioritization between OKRs? Now let's start from the beginning. Sorry. Because I've seen a lot more questions here. Would you recommend to apply the 80-20 rule? 80% comes from the OKR set. Here, I understand 80-20 rule in the sense that you can do 80% of the work with 20% of the time. I mean, at the end, it depends a bit on the one hand side, if you set stretch goals, means if you are satisfied with 70% or something around 70% of progress, or if you want to achieve the 100%, here it depends also a bit on your organization. Some are really thinking, or big organizations especially, are still used to 100% goal achievement. Then it's definitely not working. In general, I would say it makes sense, yes. And then what is about the flight levels of OKRs? How should I consider the other flight levels in the process, given we work in a product team? To be honest, can the person who wrote this get a bit more concrete on what is actually meant here? Maybe in the chat as well. That would be very helpful. I will then go for the next question. You mentioned that your capacity needs to be allocated for strategic work. Strategic work stands for technical depth enabling projects. Did you mean by that on projects that are not directly related to company goals, business goals? No, I mean, for me, strategic work is most times one-time work, similar to projects. Yeah, you develop something, and then say Alessia from our enablement team always provides the example that say like development work or strategic work is building the system, and operative work is running the system. Yeah. First, you have to create something, establish something, optimizing something, implementing something, and then you just run it over time. And this is also how I understand strategic work. And therefore, you should just consider these kind of things in your strategic capacity planning for strategic work then. Another question is how a classic scorecard that helps with the prioritization of initiatives is used in the OKR framework, or it's not used at all in that case. What is meant with a classic scorecard, where you have like financial implications, employee consideration, customer consideration? So like, is that meant with a classic scorecard, or is it about costs, quality, and time? Maybe also here a bit clarification would help to answer properly. For now, I would, there is scorecard that eventually helps to prioritize different initiatives. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, if you, at the end, why you build initiatives? Because your key result metrics are just the medium to measure something. And if you then build an action plan to achieve it, you're at the beginning not 100% certain what works and what not. And for sure, I would then say like, okay, based on what I know so far, and on maybe based on the resources we have, we start with X, Y, Z, prioritize it, and yeah, you can take into account several criteria, and budget definitely is also one, or time, and then yeah, work in a backlog. Start with something. If it's not working, start something new and figure out what works. Hope that answers the question a bit. What else do we have? Where would you define technical debt work in your OKR strategy, if at all, things that don't have a direct influence on the customer? Technical debt work, yeah, here it depends. I would say in some situation you can consider that in an OKR, because if you say like, okay, we want to, for example, why we get rid of technical debt, because to further speed up, maybe to reduce the amount of bugs, maybe to increase quality, these kind of things, then it can be fair enough to add that as an OKR. At the end, it depends a bit what you want to achieve with OKRs. If you just want to create transparency on what is most important to you, and also for your managers to see, okay, where are we with respect to several metrics, maybe also operative metrics that are important to us, then can be worth to enter that in an OKR and also have a look at that on an ongoing basis. And if you want to say like, okay, for me, it's most important about maybe alignment, these kind of things, then maybe it's not worth to add it. Here, it depends a bit on your situation, but I know some of our customers definitely do that and add also technical debt work in OKRs. How does the prioritization between OKRs work? Who prioritizes according to which criteria? At the end, from my perspective, teams should prioritize their work at the end by saying, okay, what is most important? On the one hand side, for the organization and the organization's long-term goals. Yeah, what has the biggest impact? And I mean, the whole OKR system, the whole strategy execution system is just a hypothesis system where you said like, okay, I believe this has most impact on X, Y, Z. And you have these value driver trees with lagging indicators, with leading indicators, and with the output work on the bottom. And here, at the end, it's your own judgment. What makes sense? And I mean, my feeling is that especially teams that are close to the business, that are close to the customers, can assess that best what has the biggest impact on the long-term strategy. And here, which criteria you choose depends on the goal you want to reach, the long-term goal you want to reach. So a black and white answer is also very difficult here. But who should do it? At the end, the team, and maybe you do a grading in the team where it's like, okay, who votes for what? This is how we do it usually, and everyone in the team votes then, and then we decide which ones are the most important ones.